Hello, good morning, good evening for us, and good afternoon for some of you. And welcome to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Steve. Hi all.
Lovely to have you on today. Very excited to have you talk to us about something which I find very interesting. Deployment, I think something that's coming up very strongly, I think, in the community, and people are learning a lot about. So very excited to have you on. For those who maybe don't know you, I know you speak a lot. In fact, we were just having a chat behind the scenes about all the speaking you've been doing recently. Why don't you introduce yourself and say hello?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Kevin Chant. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MCP from McCall, based in the Netherlands. However, as you might be able to tell from the accent, and of course Steve knows this already, I'm actually originally from the southwest of the UK. So yeah, as well as being Data Platform MVP, Lead Technology Advocate, Microsoft Certified Trainer, Fabric Super User, etc., etc. And obviously quite a few years experience working with data and IT in general. Done quite a lot with CI/CD over the years, all the way back to work doing it for SQL Server and then for engineering services. And then for me personally, it was just a natural progression to start doing it for Fabric. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Lovely to have you on. Me and Kev, we've chatted quite a few times at conferences. Definitely a seasoned speaker, I'd say. Over in the both as a UK takeover today, so we're both UK, but you're over in the Netherlands for some time now, I believe.
Yeah, just over a decade now. It's hard to believe. It's like a blink of an eyelid, and all of a sudden 10 years have gone past. And I'm like, it's so quick. I've actually got to renew my driving license. I've been there for that.
Yeah. Loving it, I assume, then still enjoying it over there.
Yeah, it's good over here. It's a good way of life.
Yeah. And you can see by his clever subtitle here, still the British expat. I was over in the States for a bit. I've moved back now back to the UK. But yeah, both over here in Europe. I think we're going to be hitting some European conferences. We'll talk about SQL bits coming up, and then back over to the States for FabCon. So very exciting time speaking coming up.
Yeah, there are lots of conferences all around for everybody at the moment. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time for all, I think.
Yeah, I think they've come back with force. I think obviously we had a bit of a dip over the COVID years, but definitely fall back, and I'm loving being at the conferences again, and no, you are as well.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, obviously online was good during lockdown, and online now and again is still good. Yeah, for a lot of people, they miss that networking, they miss the human connection at these events. So it's good that everybody's back together again. Unless, of course, you're on my former webcam that had excessive use over lockdown.
Yeah, I know you were saying we were chatting before, and you were saying you were speaking most weeks and more than once a week.
Yeah. I think during lockdown, I was presenting at least once a week with my regular co-presenter. So we were quite in demand back then.
Well, we're very grateful you've come on to our channel today. I think, so interested to hear a little bit about what we're talking about today. I know we'll have a few slides to kind of set things up and have a bit of a chat. So maybe you can introduce the session and kind of what you want to go through.
Yes, so I'm going to basically go through various ways to deploy through Azure Pipelines, to be honest with you. And obviously, I will give a slight intro about Azure DevOps just for the benefit of those who work more with GitHub, to be honest with you. I will throw in a very small amount of AI during that part, very, very small amount. So yeah, I'll go through that first because everyone needs a good understanding of Azure Pipelines. And then we'll just go through some of the options, to be honest with you, at a relaxed pace. And we'll just cover a few topics relating to that briefly.
So, yeah, and I think this topic for me, funnily enough, I just last week on the channel, if you have a look, I did a GitHub tutorial, just a very basic overview one. I think with the rise of AI and all this this coding that's happening is becoming a lot easier to code. This is probably one of the most important skills I see coming for this year, the next year, being able to deploy things properly, knowing how to do the source control, and then the deployment on top of that, I think is just going to be a huge must know, or for everyone, even those sort of citizen developers who've come up.
Yeah. And the thing is, as well, a lot of people are experiencing paper cuts along the way whilst performing CI/CD. So something I like to do is help people out where I can with solutions to overcome the paper cuts that they get. That's part
Lovely.
of what I do.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think you've got a couple of things you want to just to kind of set the stage so we can bring up the slides.
Yeah, I'll bring up the slides up. And obviously there are a few slides, some diagrams, some slides I won't focus on that long because, yeah, you don't want to all see slides. Some people want to see everything in action. So Azure DevOps in a nutshell, yeah, it is really a collection of services, to be honest with you, whereas GitHub initially started basically from the ground up, starting to support people sharing repositories, etc. Azure DevOps came to be, it was originally Visual Studio Team services, and it is actually a collection of different services together. So like you can see on the screen here, there's two main versions. I won't go into that too much, but there is an MCP server available now, and there are some good things you can do with the MCP server. I'll actually show you all this in a minute because it is quite exciting times. I will do a very quick walkthrough because I do like doing live demos. So this is Azure DevOps when you first go into it. For the benefit of those who don't know, you can do various things if you've got right permission at the organization level. I will be honest though, if you're working for a large company, there's a strong chance you won't have much influence over this, but it's good to know that it's there, especially if you create your own organization for testing purposes, which I do actually recommend, even if you have to create one for yourself at home. So I won't go into all these settings, but they are available. Every organization has one or more projects, and all the default projects I mentioned earlier, folks, are all here. The main ones to care about for doing CD at the absolute most basic, Azure repos. This is where you store your Git repositories. And if you go into it, you can see it's a visual representation of a Git repository. And it comes with quite a few different commands, and these are actually directly Git commands as well, the majority of them anyway. And then there's Azure Pipelines. And basically this comes with a host of features as well. And my biggest piece of advice, if your workplace asks you to do CI/CD with Azure DevOps, make sure, of course, yeah, learn the basics, but learn the most about Azure repos and Azure pipelines. Knowing how to do all the security settings, knowing how to use features like libraries, environment variables, basic environments, etc., will put you in a very good place to perform CI/CD and perform it well. So this is a very quick walkthrough. There's some other features as well, like test plans and Azure artifacts and project settings. Now, regardless of the size of the company you work for, there's a strong chance that you can influence these settings, and there's various options here. I won't go through them all today for everybody. There's this thing called a search engine that you can look at and use to find all the different ones, information about each one.
Or an LLM now.
LLMs, indeed. ChatGPT, Copilot, GitHub Copilot, and Visual Studio Code. That reminds me, that's a very nice, smooth walk into the next demo. I'll do that in a minute.
Excellent.
So, first of all, before I do that, one piece of advice I always give about service connections: make sure you give them a nice user-friendly name, regardless how you create them, because if you just did the clickety-click wizard, you could end up exposing your subscription ID. Not a big deal in itself, maybe, until you actually look to create pipelines. And then you have to specify your service connection name, which will include your subscription ID. So as you can see, that's potentially a little bit of an issue. Anyway, I did mention about GitHub Copilot and Visual Studio Code. So let's have a look and see. I'm not going to start all of this up. I've already set up, and you can install, it's a remote host, as they call it, Azure DevOps MCP server. I'm not going to go through the ins and outs of MCP in this session. Just know it's brilliant if you're working with an or something like GitHub Copilot, for example, because then you can actually query things in real time. So I've got a brilliant pre-done example here to create a British TV series. Here's one I did earlier. So as you can see, I've been using natural language just to query the contents of my Azure DevOps organization and project. Now, this MCP server is brilliant for a couple of good reasons. First of all, let me go down to the right one. It's not on this particular example, it's on the other one. First of all, you can run pipelines using natural language, which is great. So I can query my pipelines and then go, okay, can you just run the pipeline for me? It saves me having to go into Azure DevOps, go through the pipelines and run. No, just ask it nicely. And as you can see here, you can actually create very rich wiki documentation. So for anybody working in Azure DevOps who wants to create nice, deep, detailed wiki pages, or because you've been asked to, you can do it directly with this MCP server and go, yeah, just go very nicely. As you can see here, please create a wiki for me detailing all of my repositories and all the pipelines connected to them. And it will do that for you. So I highly recommend you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, to cut you off, I think I want to jump in here because this is a sort of a thing very passionate to me. We hear a lot about people, vibe coding and the dangers of just using AI. To me, I think this is what I would call an LLM assisted coding. Whereas you want to learn how to do this, the fundamentals, the deployment pipelines. What you're doing here is asking targeted specific questions to help you as the developer do some of the, I don't want to say boring stuff like documentation, but some of the stuff, to be honest, it's probably going to do better than I could do. I'm not great at being clear in documentation. So I think this sort of stuff for an LM is fantastic. And this is a really awesome example that I see.
Since we're talking about documentation, Steve, I must say this here before we go any further. If you create pipeline solutions and you have repositories in Azure DevOps in any shape or form, and you want your colleagues to keep speaking to you, use something like GitHub Copilot to create documentation, README files inside your repository. So detailing, for example, how to use the pipelines, what parameters to use, etc., etc. So, yeah.
Yes.
We might as well.
How many of us have skipped that step before these LLMs came on? I think every single person can raise their hand to that one.
To be fair, I got into the habit some time ago of writing my own README files, but doing it these days with GitHub Copilot and Visual Studio Code is just so much better.
Yeah,
and it does a great job, especially if people don't realize this. You can point it at websites as well and go, give an overview. Say, for example, let's pick fabric-cicd off the top of my head. You can say, can you also provide a paragraph explaining what fabric-cicd is based on the contents of this page? And then you can put a link to the page and it will actually add that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So people, it's great. Highly recommend to do, everybody. So yeah, so that's a introduction to Azure DevOps and the Azure DevOps MCP server. So you've all learned a little bit about AI today.
We have a little clippy come up here. Whenever we talk.
Sure. Whenever we talk about AI.
It's inevitable.
Yeah. So the reason we lay this foundation is because if you want to do most of the deployment methods for Microsoft Fabric with Azure Pipeline. So basically, if you want to have pipelines orchestrated in Azure DevOps to deploy the Fabric, the majority of the time, you're going to need to use metadata about items. And to get the metadata about those items, they need to be stored in a repository. To get them stored in a repository, you're going to have to configure Microsoft Fabric Git integration. I'll go through the slides briefly, and then we'll just have a quick look at it as well. So basically, and I'll just go through this quite quickly. I said clicky there instead of quickly. So essentially what you do, you get a workspace in Fabric and you go in and you link it to a branch in a Git repository. That is effectively what it is. And it works with the cloud-based versions of Azure DevOps and GitHub. And it's good for a start of a CI/CD story, if I'm honest. Very quick introduction there. I will do a very quick demo for anybody who is yet to see it. So, say for example, I have a blank workspace. Mine's called imaginatively, by the way, blank workspace. I can go to Git integration and I just click through here, but I will very quickly click to show the fact that you can do this with a service principal or your own intro account. And you just go through this nice drop-down wizard, and then at the end, the metadata for your repository, and I can show you this, Steve, actually. Actually, I'd have to show you. You've seen this numerous times, I suspect. But for the benefit of everybody else, you will basically get a new source control option appear. You'll get a new Git status column. And then if, like me, you have a lot of repositories, what you can also do for a shortcut is click through repository. And it will basically take you through to your repository in question. And in my case, it's this one. So this is, and I do know that some of you, if you've watched past live streams from this event, will have already seen this. This is how your Fabric items look in metadata, in other words, as a form of code to an extent. Various different types, if I'm honest with you, there's different file types, etc. But it breaks it down into text. That's the main part to remember. And then from there, you can actually use this as a source for deployments for various different methods to other Microsoft Fabric workspaces. So this, for example, a point, but it's not here yet. So this is for a workspace that represents your development environment. And then what you can do is deploy by whatever means necessary to one that represents your test environment.
And again, I want to highlight, I think the point you said about this is just metadata, right? So obviously there's no data. So you're not copying gigabytes of your data.
Let's manage some expectations. It's metadata. However, if you're doing something interesting that converts some of your data, say, for example, to columns somewhere, that will be part of your metadata. So yeah, it is metadata, but if you're doing something interesting to translate data to, for example, column names or field names and semantic models, etc., it can still appear. Also, thanks, Steve. Let's bring up this topic now. Also, just bear in mind, it will store all of your code in notebooks. So if, for example, you decide to test putting some like an Azure Data Lake storage account key directly into your notebook, just bear in mind, if you click on commit, like for example here, it won't come up, I won't make the change, but if there is a change to commit, you would actually be committing that Azure Data Lake storage key to your Git repository. So bear that in mind, folks. There's a few ways you can prevent this. Carry on.
Yeah, I just want to jump in a point here because this is something I'd seen fairly recently. And I actually had an LLM analyze this. And they noticed that it was just a test account we had with a developer. And they weren't really doing much. So it wasn't live. They had accidentally committed a key, deleted it, but then in the commit history, it was still there. So this can persist. So it's very important to understand security. And so when I said, this is super important with AI, this next part I think you're going to go through is even more important, and I think what a lot of the IT people are worried about. So I think listen to this part and heed these words would be my advice here.
Yeah. So if any of you, by the way, ever gets asked at work, how can I prevent this happening ever? Just turn around and say you can use, and I'm just trying to find it here. It's actually under security overview. There is a feature you can enable to prevent this called GitHub Advanced Security for Azure DevOps. And actually, as you can imagine, it came from GitHub. And it is good because it will find certain secrets before and it will block you from committing them. However, like all good things in the world, it comes at a cost. And it backdates as well for everybody who's committed to the repository. And I think it's in the last 60 days now. And it's like 50, I think it's like 50 euros per user per month. It's, like I said, it is backdated. But yeah, that can prevent this happening. So if people are really, really concerned about it, they can implement this, but it does come at a cost. And it is the same advanced security that obviously people would have worked with in GitHub. So, but going back to Steve's comment about this, yeah, he's seen it. GitHub takes this so seriously, they have an entire page dedicated to what you must do if you accidentally do this for a public Git repository in GitHub. Because you have to securely wipe your repository locally. Then you have to raise a request with GitHub asking them to go and clear it from all of their caches worldwide. So bear that in mind if you ever do that. Yeah. So that was Git integration in a nutshell, and a bit of security for everybody as well, just for good measure. So yeah, and the reason that you would use Git integration, as this diagram shows, there is a recommended development process by Microsoft. And wherever interestingly, this applies to if you're working with Fabric deployment pipelines as well, folks, because what Microsoft are recommending, regardless of how you're going to do CI/CD, is actually to create a copy of your, clone your branch, create a new branch, basically called a feature branch. It's a term that people who've worked with DevOps, etc., know for many years. This is a process tried and true by a lot of developers. Obviously new to a lot of people working in Fabric though. So a lot of people now have to adopt this kind of practice for good working practices. So what Microsoft are effectively recommending is, yeah, work with a feature branch either locally or as a feature branch that's connected to a Fabric workspace, and then merge it to your next branch on, which is typically your main development branch. However, me personally, and of course I know people like Steve, etc., who work a lot with Power BI will probably be happy to see this. I do recommend that you introduce unit tests if you're going to do this, because you can actually do these unit tests against the metadata I showed you just now. So when you're going to merge from your feature branch to the next branch on, you can automatically run a pipeline. You can run tests by running a pipeline. I'm sure you've already had a demo relating to this already done, Steve. If not, I can do a demo for you. So I'm quite relaxed on that front.
People would love a demo if you have one available. Sure we've had something similar, but I'm sure you have a great one we'd love to see.
Yeah, I'll quickly do this demo for you, because then it will show the whole process of working locally with a Power BI report, sending it up, etc., doing the pull request. I will do this fast, so for the benefit of those watching the recording, times it by 1.5 or slow it down by 1.5, maybe 2. So my Visual Studio version decided to go to the other screen, but I've just made a change to a page in a Power BI report stored locally. It's stored in what's known as a Git repository. Git repository, I'll give you a very quick introduction to what a Git repository really is. It's a folder or a directory with a hidden.git folder. In that hidden.git folder is a proprietary database that tracks all the changes that happens. There you go. Now you all know the very basics of Git. So anyway, this has been what's known as initialized, basically created the .git repository folder and the proprietary database. So I'm just using a bit of Visual Studio Code, well, GitHub Copilot magic here to create my commit statement for me, because you can do that now. By the way, only do this if you've got quite a good amount of credits left on your GitHub Copilot and you don't do many Git commits. Otherwise, you will use them quite fast. So I'm just synchronizing the change now to my repository.
I would say getting good at writing Git commits is a very important skill. I think everyone should learn. If you describing the changes you've done so people can understand them is important.
It is a good skill. Even better skill is to have GitHub Copilot installed and know how to click that icon.
There you go.
That's one of my best tips for you right now. So if we go to my feature branch, I've done a change here. And if I went to the right workspace in question, so this is the one that's connected. I'm just going to do a refresh because, as some of you probably already know, in Fabric sometimes you can do these kind of things. You see I've made a change. I can commit. Yeah. But my dev workspace is yet to be updated. So you have to do a pull request. And this is the important part of the demo for you already. So I'm going to do a pull request. A pull request for anyone who hasn't done one before is basically where you're asking for permission. This is a overview, really. You're asking for permission to merge from one branch to another. So I'm just saying merge from my feature branch to my dev branch. It hasn't picked up the name, rather interesting. So I'm just going to type this here. Usually it does pick up your commit message. Hasn't on this particular occasion. Most important part of this whole demo, as you can see, it's running a pipeline. So it's doing that because if I go to my dev branch, I have what is set up. And this is why it's so important to learn the basics of Azure DevOps. I've added what's known as a branch policy to my dev branch. What it's basically saying is every time someone wants to do a merge into this branch, run this particular pipeline. I'll very quickly show what this pipeline is because you can download this pipeline from Microsoft Online. I've translated it to a classic pipeline. So there's two types of pipelines in Azure DevOps. There is a slide that mentions this, I think, at some stage. There's the classic pipelines, which are GUI-based, and the YAML pipelines that are code. That's as much as I will say for now. This is a classic pipeline. So this is what this pipeline is effectively doing. And then once the pull request is completed, as long as there's no major issues, I can approve, I can set the complete, and then once it's completed, I would go and update the dev branch. I won't go and show all of it now because I'm sure there's been similar demos online, and this is a very quick version of it. For those wondering though, how to branch out to a new workspace, I will point this out because there is an offering made available by Microsoft that a lot of people aren't aware of. I want to raise awareness. So ways to branch out to a new workspace from a dev branch basically to a feature branch, Steve, because this is something a lot of people don't know. Obviously, a lot of people know they can do it by the GUI to either a new workspace or an existing one. What a lot of people don't realize is that you can actually automate this in Azure Pipelines. And the main reason would be, as you know, Steve, a lot of companies say, no, you can't use branch out to new workspace because that means we have to give you permissions to create new workspaces. So one way to work around this is to go to the Fabric toolbox and download the set of scripts that allows you to put in place the automation to branch out to a new workspace. I've got it myself on, I'll show you all how it looks shortly, and it does work quite nicely. What I will do, because I've already effectively showed some of this in my demo just now, so I won't go through all this again. What I'll do very quickly is just show what I mentioned just now. So I do have the pipeline for it here. I won't go through the whole code. This is, by the way, for those who've never seen one, welcome to YAML Pipelines. If you are working with Azure Pipelines, by the way, I do recommend that you all work with YAML pipelines instead of classic pipelines. Classic pipelines are good for learning. I'm sure you did a similar thing at the beginning, Steve. I know I did. They're good for getting us used to the concepts in Azure DevOps, but for long-term use and business use and sharing code, YAML pipelines are so much better. So I won't go through all of this, but effectively this, you have to enter the parameters, and then it will allow you can run a couple of Python scripts, and that will do all the branch out logic for you. There, if you go to the Fabric.
So I just want to point out to those, to those YAML pipelines, maybe look a bit scary to people who've, don't know YAML. This is great with LLMs. I'd say just if you kind of can understand, can read a bit, they can really help you write these out and then really help you as an assistant get there. And to your point, makes it a lot better. As long as you know what you're doing, I wouldn't just completely blind trust it, but it can really help you get there, and it makes that iteration a lot easier.
It does. To be fair, Microsoft provides a lot of detail now about all of the YAML schema.
Yeah.
There's Microsoft Learn on how to get started. Depending on the way of learning, there's some good videos online you can watch as well. In addition to that, and this is one thing I will highlight here, and I do believe a lot of people actually share repositories in GitHub, which have got examples of how to do various things with either GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps. So it's always good to go on GitHub and have a look as well, because it could be that people have already done stuff in the past. And that can help you a lot if you use that as a template, folks. Now, there are a few ways you can do these deployments once you've got that stuff in the Git repository. You can do Git-based deployments. And this is basically where you have multiple workspaces connected to the same Git repository, but they're just attached to different branches. And then you do that, like I showed just now, Steve, those pull requests. You can do that to update the workspaces, or you can call the APIs in Azure Pipelines and then run some remediation code to actually go and fix things like all the binding issues, etc. Can be a bit tedious after a while, but you can do it. Obviously, I'm not going to show. I can show a nice diagram for you all. This is basically give you an idea of to visualize how it works. So like I said, I showed you just now how to do it manually with a pull request. You can do it with APIs as well if you want. And it's better to do it with APIs and orchestrate in Azure Pipelines. But it's an option. By far, our more popular option these days is to do it with a build pipeline though. So yeah, this allows you to deploy the different workspaces using Azure Pipelines. What I should add to this is also means you don't have to set up Git integration for any other workspaces. So if you've got test and prod workspaces, you don't, and then say, for example, you've actually got other stages as well. There's some companies use 5 deployments, different deployment stages. I've seen it happen in the real world. You don't have to set up Git integration for each one. Instead, you just work off your central branch connected to your development workspace, use the metadata there for your, I say, baseline or template, etc. And then you just, or source, then you just deploy from that source branch to the other workspaces. Saves a lot of management of Git branches. Now there's a recommendation by Microsoft that each workflow contains a build and release process. And that way you can do the unit tests I showed earlier whilst you're doing your build effectively, and then perform the updates by doing a release. Now, just help with a bit of terminology related in the build. Traditionally, build meant building something like a DATPack file or a real package. But these days, to be honest, it can just be for collectively doing that good development process into a repository, which has got all your metadata in as well. That metadata in a branch is effectively a build if you're doing a good development process. just to help with a little bit of terminology there and to help some of you realize that. And I just go through here. So that's a diagram to show you, help you all visualize how it looks. And like I said, the most important part here really for a lot of people, one key point to highlight, as I mentioned, you don't need to set up Git integration for all your destination workspaces. Now, if you're going to do this for multiple customers or solutions or tenants, and for some reason my animation appears to be off here, so let's go both of these together, Steve, and pretend that never happened. So you can manage this easily through parameters or variables. Now, if you go to the Microsoft CI/CD workflow options, they actually have this separated from the initial option to use build pipelines. And the reality is the main difference usually is parameters, to be honest, because you can just enter in parameters for a service principal in another tenant and then do the deployment that way. So the recommendation from Microsoft is that you do all the development and test work in your own tenant, and then once you've done your testing and you're happy, the next stage in an Azure pipeline is just to deploy to a workspace in whichever tenant you want it to go to. And there's a diagram to help visualize this. And this basically just means that, yeah, just deploy the workspaces in multiple tenants. You have some general recommendations. Let me have a look. As I mentioned, consider YAML pipelines. Me and Steve have talked a little bit about this already, so we can skip through this. But if you are going to use variables in Azure Pipeline, you're going to have to for deployments in the real world. Make sure you don't enter the variables directly in your pipeline. Store them in either variable groups or Azure Key Vault. And as I've mentioned already, get a good idea of the basics for, at the very least, Azure Pipelines if you're going to be working with Azure Pipelines. And ideally Azure repos, especially if you're going to be responsible for security. So let's talk a little bit about tooling relating to this, because you can write the code in Azure Pipelines to build up all your headers and your body and everything and call all the APIs for Fabric directly if you really want to. And yes, I do know, Steve, you can do this with LLMs as well, because there's lots of items online relating to how to do this. But it's a lot of code, a lot. It makes your pipeline big, everybody, basically. So what you can do is use tooling as a layer of abstraction to make things easier for yourselves. So, for example, you can use PowerShell modules. And in fact, just the other day, there was an announcement that there's a new PowerShell module available in the Fabric toolbox. So worth looking at if you're going to be doing, for example, various Fabric maintenance tasks. It's the Fabric CI/CD Python library, which as of last week is now officially supported by Microsoft. So it's effectively seen as part of the Fabric platform now. So if you're working, for example, for an organization and they have questions relating to using it because it's open source, you can say, well, actually, it's officially supported by Microsoft. And then actually, to take this one step further, you send them the blog link and go, here you go. Here's the announcement from Microsoft. And then there's a Fabric command line interface. So, Steve, do you work with any of these at all?
A little bit. Yeah, definitely our developers, especially on the DevOps side, are working with these in their capacity.
Oh, that's good. So anyway, so I actually got asked about this the other day as well. So the common question I get asked is what my tooling of choice is. So strangely enough, it's Fabric CI/CD library. So I do a very quick introduction to it all for some of you. It's effectively, as I mentioned just now, it's a Python library. So what you can do, and I go through this part of the slides quickly, and then I actually say it verbally as well. So like I showed earlier, you do that development process and you have the metadata. Yeah, that's great. And then you can actually deploy it with this Python library. So what you do, and you can do this locally, by the way, folks, you can, if you're on a machine, whether it's your own machine or a Azure Pipeline agent, specify a version of Python to use if you've got multiple. And then you can create a Python script, and in that Python script, you actually import the fabric-cicd library. And I have quotes here. It's supposed to be the ms install command, the pip install command, but I will show you this command in a bit. So that is what it effectively is, and I can actually show you it now here. So let's pretend for a moment you set up a repository for Git integration, Steve, and I've synchronized that branch down to my local machine. And here you go. Here's a collection of Fabric workspace items like reports, semantic models, etc., etc. So what I can do is, for example, I've already installed Python locally on this machine. I've installed the fabric-cicd library. So then what I can do, in a Python script, I can build it out like this. So I can go through, import a Fabric workspace item for the fabric-cicd library, and then I can build out various values and then run a script to deploy those items into a workspace. And what we do, let's do a live demo of this for everybody, just so you can all see it working. So I'm just going to delete these items very quickly, and then I can run the command again. So this is just one script I will show you here briefly. This has got hard-coded values in it. Please don't do this for every single deployment you're going to do. This is purely for introductory basis. And I think Steve is going to share a link, if he hasn't already, to a GitHub repository. So if you're brand new to fabric-cicd, you want to test it on your own machine first before looking to use it either in Azure DevOps or GitHub. This is the ideal repository for you to get started. The README file has got a lot of depth into it, and it comes with free sample scripts to use.
Anyway, it's in the comments there, just to let you know, it's in the comments, and if you're watching on repeat, it's down in the description as well.
So I'm just going to run this Python script that's here. And what would happen, and will happen, if I hit refresh, but obviously I don't want to stay on this particular one forever. So as you can see, items are already starting to appear. So there you go. But like I said, as you build up over time, what you will do is actually use, after you've done one that's hard coded, you'll start using variables by using rparse, because, let's get to the right one here. So when fabric-cicd was first announced, the initial sample said, yeah, and just hard code the values in and off you go. And I was like, well, actually, it'd be better to just reuse the same Python script again and again. I don't want to create multiple Python scripts for each workspace. So cut a long story short, that's how I ended up being the first person outside of Microsoft to contribute to the fabric-cicd Python library. So I put in how to do this for everybody, which is why now you get to work with arguments and pass them through. So what you can do is add the arguments, and then if you're working locally, then you can just add them, like you can see here with the double hyphen, and just put in all the arguments you want to pass in. And there is now a config functionality as well. So 2 key points before I show you how this looks in the Azure Pipelines. Parameter file is great if you want to change the values of certain things, like the GUID for default lakehouses in your notebooks, source for items in semantic models, etc. When you're deploying just to run workspace. However, if you're going to deploy the multiple workspaces and you want a central configuration, you now have the option to work, as of last week with the latest update of Fabric CI/CD, with a central configuration file. I think this is great because you can put in all of your options for every single workspace in one central config file now if you want to. And it actually doing this makes your deployment script through Python a lot leaner, as you can see here. This is far simpler than the other one I showed you just now. And you can actually run this directly in Azure DevOps. So I will quickly go over here. So this particular one, you remember I showed you that Python script just now. So this is, you first of all, you make sure that your source is your correct branch in that Git repository. If you're doing it with classic pipelines, you get a nice click-through wizard. If you're creating a YAML pipeline, you simply select when you're going through the wizard that particular branch. And then for each workspace, you just effectively do this. You choose a Python version. You install the Fabric CI/CD library, as you can see here. If you've yet to authenticate, if you've not got service connections set up, you can run PowerShell to authenticate as a service principal if needed. And then I just run the Python script like I showed you earlier. And I pass through arguments. And these arguments are typically variables that you have stored, hopefully, in a variable library. And off you go. And for the production environment, it's literally the same thing, just rinse and repeat, but with a different environment specified in my argument, and that's it. Now, as you can see here, my arguments list, Steve, is a bit long. If I'm using that central config that I showed you just now, go back over to here. Just show you this briefly. As you can see, all of a sudden with a central config file, less arguments. So it's up to everybody what their preferences are and what capabilities they require. This is all documented on the Fabric CI/CD GitHub page for everybody. However, what you can do, instead of looking around for links for Fabric CI/CD and the Fabric command line interface and other useful GitHub repositories, you can go straight to this one page, Steve. I don't know if you've ever been to Fabric Essentials, but it basically has a list of lots of useful GitHub repositories done by various members of the community. If I scroll down, you'll see a whole list of them here. But then also it has ones that are hosted by Microsoft as well. So I scroll down, Fabric CI/CD, by the way, everybody, I don't know if you heard of this, Steve, the Data Factory Testing Framework. I should mention this. If you're working with data pipelines in Microsoft Fabric, you can actually do unit tests or integration tests with this framework. It's great. I love raising awareness about this because not everybody realizes that it's there. But you can use this framework. It's in GitHub. It has, again, a detailed README. And you can set it up in Azure Pipelines to do automated tests. And those of you still working with Synapse or Azure Data Factory watching this video, it works for both of those as well. So there you go.
Lovely.
So that's why I share the link to Fabric Essentials, and it's a one-stop place you can go to for links of all of this. Very useful. Now we got 10 minutes left, so I won't go through too many of the other ones here. Suffice to say, what I've shown you just now, you can also do in YAML pipelines. I won't go through all of it too much, Steve, because there are posts available online related to the demos I showed and for deeper information as well relating to more complex situations. I did have this. I missed showing this. Sorry, Steve. This was like my comedy spin on doing Azure Pipeline demos because this is a serve pipeline, of course. So we have all served free pipelines today, everybody. So there is a couple of other things we should really mention as well. There's lots of other ways you can do it with Azure Pipelines, but something I get asked now and again about, Steve, and I don't know about you, is what about if people inherit Fabric deployment pipelines? Because a lot of people end up working somewhere new and they end up inheriting Fabric deployment pipelines, or they have a new person come into the company and their first question is, where's my approvals process in Fabric deployment pipelines? Either or. And obviously there is no approvals process at this moment in time in Fabric deployment pipelines. And sometimes people just don't want to work with Fabric deployment pipelines because they don't want to go in and deal with the clicking. So what you can do instead, and a lot of people don't realize this, Microsoft provides PowerShell scripts for doing this, by the way, everybody. You can orchestrate your Fabric deployments to your different Fabric deployment pipelines, actually in Azure Pipelines as well. I've actually done this for a few clients in the past because they've inherited Fabric deployment pipelines, formerly known as Power BI deployment pipelines, by the way, everybody. They're not new in Fabric. They've been around for quite some time. But you can orchestrate them in Azure Pipelines if you want to. And like I said then, what you can do is have an approvals process. Another thing I will highlight you can do here if you do this method, which can be useful. You've probably seen, Steve, a lot of people ask, if you do CI/CD, how do I get data into my lakehouse? So what you can do is, after doing this in Azure Pipeline, after doing your deployment to a stage in Azure Pipelines, you can actually then run a notebook instead, as well, I should say. Sorry, everyone. And then that notebook can actually consume data into your lakehouse, create data, import data, etc., into your lakehouse. You can do the same with data pipelines as well if you wish, but a more common thing for people to do is actually run a notebook, which you can do now as a service principal, by the way, everybody. That was a little bit of a blocker before, not a blocker anymore. So you can orchestrate in Azure Pipelines to start a notebook, and you actually do this even easier with a Fabric command line interface as well. Do you know one of the best things about running it with a Fabric command line interface, Steve?
What's that?
It's the fact that by default, it does it synchronously. So you can issue a fab run and then the notebook command, and then it will actually wait for the notebook to complete instead of assuming it's completed. And when you go in, you find the notebook is still actually running in Fabric. So I think that's great, because I've my piece of advice for you all, everybody. If you're going to run a notebook externally, please make sure you run it synchronously, so it waits for it to complete, because otherwise, yeah, like I said, you'll be halfway through and you won't even realize it. So that's it really for doing the majority of Fabric items. There's one thing I will touch on before we go, for the benefit of all of you who have done CI/CD for SQL over the years. Just want to highlight, you can still work with DATPack deployments to both SQL database and Fabric. And you can also do this, by the way, everyone, for Fabric data warehouses. A couple of times people have asked me why you would do this, and my answer is always the same. Either it's just in workspaces that for some reason don't have Git integration configured, or if you've got multiple items in the same workspace. That's a thing I've seen a few times as well, like multiple SQL databases in Fabric bundled together in the same workspace. So you can still perform CI/CD between them by doing this. So that's the last of it, really, that I want to show everybody. I can literally talk for hours about this. This is my very short conversational version of this. Any thoughts or questions from yourself, Steve?
No, I think that was a lovely overview. I think it's been very interesting, I think, to see, how this has progressed. I will say if you've come and tried to do this maybe in Fabric 2 years ago, 1 year ago, you'll probably have a different experience now. I think this was a little less mature when Fabric first came out.
I think there was only 5 items supported at first. And it's the same for Fabric. Oh, I'll tell you what, can you share my screen again? Because, you've just reminded me, we should probably show everybody something before we finish. So on that note, everybody, I will show about the number of supported items. We better cover this quickly, Steve. So one thing I see commonly online from everybody, I'll do this very fast. A lot of people say to me, the problem with Fabric CI/CD is it doesn't support a lot of items. And the majority of the time I say to them, have you got, which version of Fabric CI/CD are you pointing to on the page? And to be honest, a lot of the time, they are pointing to an earlier version. So if we go back here, for example, so back in the days when Fabric CI/CD supported 5 whole items, it has changed since then, folks. If you go to this page and you last went to it some time ago, make sure you go to the top and select the latest version. And then you get the whole list. Thanks for jogging my memory. You can stop sharing my screen again. Sorry, everyone. It's a very important point I want everyone to realize, because I see this question appear online quite a lot.
Yeah, and I know it's been difficult for the Microsoft team, I think, because Fabric isn't necessarily, a new thing which they just built. It's a bunch of existing services coming together under this platform, right? So
yeah,
I think getting those to work together in CI/CD maybe took a bit, but I think it's come a really long way now, and I think it's utterly important. And recently I've seen some good updates, and I'm happy with kind of the direction they've been taking.
Yeah, even as you can see on our house, you couldn't see, no one else can. Even data agents are now supported by both Git integration and Fabric CI/CD, which is good. So if you're looking to chat with your data, it's great. But yeah, it has come a long way. And the thing a lot of people tend to, I won't say forget, but need to remember is that when our products first came available, they didn't have everything available straight away as well. But of course, over time, lots of features have been introduced to products, and they've been there for so long. People expect them now in every single new product. So of course, when you got something like Fabric, which is touching a lot of different workloads, there's always going to be certain features there that people are expecting by default, which aren't quite there yet. Of course, CI/CD was one of them. The CI/CD story, like you said, has got a whole lot better over time.
Yeah.
So
very excited to see how they progress it and keep going. Obviously, building off things like Azure DevOps, as you mentioned, with their integration to Fabric Pipelines. If you use Fabric Pipelines, the Power BI pipelines, they're great. If you're brand new, you want to copy some stuff, your business user, really fantastic, right? And you've never done this before, get you into this habit and kind of get you learning to this journey. Definitely some limitations compared to what you just showed. Let's say that. So, Azure DevOps is a great tool. And again, you went through Azure DevOps, obviously GitHub, also owned by Microsoft, we should say, equally as good. Different use cases, I think, as you mentioned at the beginning. DevOps has a lot of other services.
I will mention, the thing about GitHub as well is that, it is supported. However, you need to work with personal access tokens when you're working with Git integration and GitHub. The good thing is
not as nice.
The good thing is, though, about it is that Microsoft have now started supporting the what they call the GitHub sovereign places now. So if you've asked and been approved to have a GitHub organization, for example, deployed explicitly in the EU now, that is now supported with Git integration. It wasn't before, but now it is. But this is obviously something that you only get if you're working with GitHub Enterprise. So you can request to GitHub, can I have an organization deployed and only deployed in a certain region, please? And there's 3 regions, I believe, supported at the moment. I think it's the EU, obviously, and Australia, and I think the other one is the US, if I remember at the top of my head, because of the protection laws. So it is good that they're now supported as well. But yeah, like Steve said, you can do it with GitHub. GitHub Actions, to be honest, has come a long way since they were first introduced. I'm actually off topic. I'm a GitHub Actions publisher, by the way.
Oh, in the publishing to everything. You have a lot of code and publishing out there as well. Very cool.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I mentioned that because there is a lot of organizations there who obviously just use GitHub. If you're Microsoft and you are coming through this, then you're looking to explore, DevOps would be probably, if you're familiar with Microsoft, my first choice, to be honest. This is how I learned Git, and then through those DevOps and the tools that preceded that, and I think they were great. If you're familiar with Microsoft, it's a great tool. Lots of other stuff too, and the test suite and all of that kind of that comes with it. It's a huge tool that you can actually utilize.
Yeah, and to be honest, a lot of it, there is a lot of parity in GitHub as well with the features now. You just gotta learn how to use them. I mean, I was quite lucky. I actually had to go through and get some GitHub certifications some time ago now, and went through and learned a lot of the other features as well. Yeah, it is great.
And if you're new, I'd say Git isn't that scary. I think it's my issue with Git and DevOps and GitHub. There's a lot of terminology, and I think that scares people because there's a lot of new words that people say, and you never use these words in these terms, but you just need to learn a little bit, and I think it's easier to learn than I think people realize.
Yeah, and there are applications to help everybody as well. I mean, a lot of people work through the command line, and sometimes that's what puts a bit of people off because they look online and they find it's all command line references. But there are GUIs to help as well, and I mean, as I showed earlier, Visual Studio Code, you have source control, which basically manages Git for you behind the scenes. You have Git.
Awesome.
Yeah, desktop as well.
My recommendation, and I say this, Visual Studio Code. I mean, it's great. You can get it for free. It's so much there. That would be my first choice if I was learning.
Definitely,
for sure.
And the extensions have come a long way, and there's a lot of extra extensions, and you get things like Fabric Studio that you can use, and Visual Studio Code as well. I mean, it is great to work with.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think we're at time now. Really cool walkthrough. It's come a really long way, and it's really awesome to see. I think for a lot of people as well who are familiar with Azure DevOps and maybe less familiar with Fabric, to see this integration, I think that's going to be a really cool thing as well. So thank you so much for coming on. Any last words, any last tips that you have for our audience?
Not really tips as such. The one thing that popped into my head, because you were talking about using Visual Studio Code, is just talking about AI earlier, and the fact that now you can actually use Fabric data agents. You can actually connect that for an MCP server in Visual Studio Code now. So you can remotely connect that to your Fabric data agents on your local copy of Visual Studio Code and ask it questions in natural language. And that just popped into my head at the end. But yeah, like I said, everyone, if you're going to look to use Azure DevOps, just take a bit of time to at least learn the fundamentals of working with Azure Pipelines and Azure repos. And like Steve said, Git seems daunting, but there's lots of material to help online. Go to the search engine or LLM of choice, type in Git cheat sheet, and you will get quite a few results returned, and they will put you in a good place, okay?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, definitely. And please do learn it if you are new. As I said, I think this is going to be the skill, one of the big skills of 2026 to learn. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really loved having you on. I'm very excited I get to hang out a few times this year with you at all of our conferences. So really looking forward to that. And thank you everyone for coming along and watching this. And we will see you next time. Thank you.